I don't need a gift. I just want my mom to smile. Could you come to her little birthday party tonight? If stories of redemption, unexpected family, and healing touch your heart, please like and subscribe so you can walk with us through every chapter of this journey. The October afternoon carried a golden hush across Boston Common. Fallen leaves quilted the ground, rustling softly beneath the steps of joggers and dog walkers. Frog Pond reflected the pale sky, broken now and then by the ripple of passing ducks. James Whitaker sat alone on a weathered bench, the collar of his coat turned up against the cool air. A paper cup of coffee cooled in his hand, untouched. His eyes, once sharp in boardrooms, were clouded now, fixed on the willow branches swaying in the wind. To passers-by, he looked like any tired executive resting after a long day. But those who looked closely would have seen something heavier. A man haunted by absence, carrying silence like a second skin. He almost didn't notice the little girl until she was right in front of him. She was 6, maybe younger, her shoulder-length hair held back by a crooked pink clip. Her cardigan was too big, buttoned all the way up. In her hands, she clutched a folded paper bag, edges worn from being carried tightly. Her eyes, large, green, impossibly steady, lifted to meet his. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice fragile but clear. James blinked, startled. "Yes?" The girl drew a breath. "I don't need a gift. I just want my mom to smile. Could you come to her little birthday party tonight?" The words landed like a stone in still water. James almost thought he had misheard. A child asking him, of all people, to a birthday party? She gripped the paper bag tighter. "It's at our home, Charles Street, 7 o'clock. Her gaze never wavered, as if she were testing the strength of his silence. James cleared his throat, uncertain. "Your mother's birthday?" She nodded. "She's been sad lately, really sad. But if someone comes, maybe she'll laugh. Maybe she'll forget the pain." Her words pierced through the walls he had built around himself. He studied her more closely now, the worn shoes, the frayed hem of her skirt, the determined courage in her tone. This wasn't a plea for toys or candy. It was a child asking a stranger to bring her mother joy. "Your name?" he asked gently. "Sophie Hayes." She stood taller, as though she had been taught to introduce herself properly. "And my mom is Emily." James felt something shift deep inside. He swallowed, hiding the tremor in his chest. "Well, Sophie, I don't know if I'd be welcome." "You will," she said with quiet certainty. "Because I'm inviting you." Before he could respond, a woman appeared along the path. She was slender, her steps slightly unsteady, as though each one cost her effort. Her chestnut hair framed a face pale with fatigue, though her coat was neatly buttoned. "Sophie," she murmured, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You can't just bother strangers." She stopped short when her eyes met James's. There was no recognition, but a flicker passed between them. 2 lives carrying different scars, both etched with loss. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, pulling Sophie closer. "She can be forward sometimes." James shook his head. Not forward, brave. Most adults forget how. Before either could say more, the woman faltered, a hand rising briefly to her chest. James was on his feet in an instant, steadying her by the elbow. Her pulse fluttered faintly beneath his hand. "I'm fine," she said softly, though her voice betrayed exhaustion. James reached into his coat and held out a card. "If you ever need anything, please." The woman hesitated, then slipped the card into her pocket. "Thank you." Sophie tugged her mother's hand, her green eyes still fixed on James. 7 o'clock, she whispered like a secret. Charles Street. Mother and daughter turned down the brick path, their figures soon lost among the glow of gas lamps and drifting leaves. James remained at the bench long after, the forgotten coffee cooling beside him. Sophie's invitation echoed in his chest, fragile yet insistent. 7 o'clock. Charles Street. When the hour arrived, the narrow streets of Beacon Hill glowed with lamplight. James paused outside a modest brownstone, the sound of faint laughter spilling from within. He checked his watch. Exactly 7. And though he hadn't spoken any promise aloud, his presence on the doorstep was one. The narrow streets of Beacon Hill glowed that evening as if they had been dusted with copper. Gas lamps lined the brick sidewalks, their flames flickering against shuttered windows and the wrought iron railings of old brownstones. James Whitaker, who had once dined beneath chandeliers in Paris and signed billion-dollar deals inside New York skyscrapers, now found himself pausing in front of a modest gabled house on Charles Street. The card Sophie had pressed into his mind, 7 o'clock, burned like a quiet command. For a moment, he hesitated, hand resting against the polished brass knocker. What was he doing? He was a stranger, a CEO still wrapped in grief, about to step into the fragile life of a mother and daughter he had met only hours ago. Yet something in Sophie's whisper had anchored itself inside him. Against all reason, he knocked. The door opened almost at once. Sophie stood there, her hair brushed neatly, the pink clip replaced by a red ribbon. She wore a simple white dress, one that looked pressed by careful small hands. The smile she gave him lit the hallway brighter than any lamp. "You came," she said softly, though her eyes carried triumph, as though she had never doubted it. Behind her, the home revealed itself in pieces. The ceilings were low, the plaster uneven, but warmth clung to the air. Faint vanilla from the oven, the glow of mismatched candles on a table, a single vase of daisies trying to stand tall. James stepped inside, ducking his head slightly as Sophie shut the door behind him. Emily appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a faded towel. She had tied her chestnut hair back, though loose strands framed her face, catching the glow of the candles. She wore a plain cardigan over a modest blouse, the kind of outfit chosen for comfort more than style. And yet, there was something undeniably graceful about her presence, like a painting softened by time. "Mr. Whitaker," she said quietly, not quite hiding her surprise. "I didn't expect—" "It's James," he interrupted gently. "And thank you for letting me intrude." Her lips curved into a faint, reluctant smile. "Well, Sophie doesn't usually give strangers our address, but you're here. Would you like to join us?" He nodded, slipping his overcoat onto a hook by the door. The hallway smelled faintly of cinnamon, though underneath lingered the sterile scent of medication. The dining table was small, pushed against a window that overlooked the street. On it sat a little round cake, no larger than a saucer, crowned with 6 stubby candles Sophie must have scavenged from past birthdays. A hand-drawn card leaned against a teacup, the crayon letters spelling "Happy Birthday, Mom" in uneven strokes. Sophie climbed onto her chair, eyes bright. "We waited for you to light the candles," she told James, as if he were family already. Emily's cheeks flushed with both pride and embarrassment. She struck a match, the flames trembling into life. Sophie clapped her hands and urged her mother to make a wish. Emily closed her eyes. Her palms pressed together. For a moment, James saw her shoulders relax, as though she let herself imagine a life beyond hospital corridors and unpaid bills. When she blew out the candles, the smoke curled upward like a prayer carried into the night. "Did you wish for something?" Sophie asked eagerly. Emily opened her eyes, catching James's gaze before looking back at her daughter. "I wished for us to be together." That's enough. They ate slices of cake served on mismatched plates. Sophie talked with the animation of a child who knew silence too well and fought against it with stories. She described her school, her favorite teacher, the way she tried to help her mom with chores. James listened, laughter slipping from him in rare bursts he hadn't known his voice could still make. But between Sophie's words, James's eyes caught details Emily tried to hide. The prescription bottles lined discreetly near the sink, the folder stamped MGH, cardiology on the counter, the faint pallor beneath her smile. It twisted something inside him. He had buried his own family in sterile hallways, lost them to bureaucracy and hesitation. To see Emily navigating the same labyrinth of medicine and uncertainty, alone, struck him with brutal familiarity. "Do you work nearby?" Emily asked, breaking his silence. "Yes," James said carefully. "Whitaker Financial. Our offices are across the river in Cambridge." Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps even intimidation. "That's quite the firm." He shrugged, though the weight of his title pressed against his chest. "It keeps me busy. Too busy sometimes." Sophie interrupted, her fork clattering against her plate. "Mom, did you know James helped me feed the ducks at the pond today? He didn't even mind when I spilled the bag." Emily smiled at her daughter, though her gaze lingered on James, softer now. "That was kind of you." Kind. He wanted to laugh at the word. For years he had been called powerful, ruthless, brilliant, rarely kind. And yet sitting here, in a Beacon Hill apartment where the wallpaper peeled and the candles guttered, he realized kindness was the one currency he had long abandoned. The evening stretched, stitched together by Sophie's chatter and Emily's quiet laughter. At one point, Sophie dashed off to her room and returned with a worn sketchbook. She showed James drawings of houses with slanted roofs and wide gardens, always with 3 figures inside: mother, daughter, and a tall man drawn with blocky shoulders. "That's our future home," Sophie announced. "Someday, when Mom is better." James's throat tightened. He could not speak, only nod, as Emily quickly folded the sketchbook closed, her cheeks coloring. When the clock struck 9, James rose reluctantly. He reached for his coat, but Emily stopped him near the door. "Thank you," she said softly, "for coming, for making her night different." Her eyes searched his, unspoken questions trembling on her lips. Before either could say more, Sophie appeared, tugging at James's sleeve. "Promise you'll come again," she whispered, her small fingers wrapping around his hand with startling certainty. James bent to meet her gaze. "I promise," he said, though he wasn't sure what that promise meant or how deeply it would bind him. As he stepped into the crisp night, the sounds of Charles Street alive with quiet footsteps and distant laughter, James felt something he hadn't in months, a reason to keep moving forward. The little birthday party had been nothing more than cake and candles. Yet to him, it was a beginning. Massachusetts General Hospital loomed over the edge of the Charles River, its glass facade reflecting a sky washed pale by autumn light. For most people, the building was a symbol of modern medicine, a place of healing. For James Whitaker, stepping through its revolving doors felt like walking back into a battlefield where invisible wars were fought. This corridor had once been his battlefield. He moved slowly past the check-in desk, memories pressing against him like ghosts. He hadn't planned to come, not today. But after the birthday evening on Charles Street, after the sight of prescription bottles lined near Emily's sink, he found his steps drawn here, as if he were tethered to Sophie's whispered plea that her mother smile again. Up ahead, he saw them. Emily, pale in her wool coat, clutched a folder to her chest as she leaned against the counter, filling out forms. Sophie balanced on tiptoe beside her, trying to peer over the ledge, her ribbon bow slipping sideways in her hair. James hesitated, then approached. Emily's eyes flicked up, startled. "Mr. Whitaker?" "James," he corrected gently. "I was in the neighborhood." Her lips curved into a faint, weary smile. "Is that what you tell all your board members when you wander into hospitals?" He almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. "Not exactly. Thought you might want company." Before Emily could reply, a nurse called her name. She rose, adjusting her coat, and Sophie hurried to grab her hand. Without thinking, James fell into step beside them. The consultation room was bright with sterile light, the blinds drawn halfway against the afternoon sun. Medical posters lined the walls, diagrams of hearts and arteries shaded in red and blue. Emily sat on the edge of the examination table, Sophie perched beside her, swinging her legs nervously. James stood near the window, trying not to intrude. The door opened, and Dr. Anika Patel stepped in. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes behind square glasses, her lab coat crisply pressed. She greeted Emily with a steady handshake. "Ms. Hayes?" "Sophie," Patel said warmly, then turned slightly, taking in James with a polite nod. "And you are?" "A friend," James answered quickly. Patel didn't press further. She pulled up a rolling stool, opening Emily's file. "I've reviewed your echocardiogram and lab results. Your heart function is severely reduced. Your ejection fraction is at 20%. That explains the fatigue, the dizziness, the shortness of breath." Emily clasped her hands together. "What does that mean, in plain language?" Patel's tone softened. "It means your heart isn't pumping enough blood to keep your body supplied. Medications have helped for a time, but they're no longer enough." Sophie's small voice cut in. "So what happens now?" Patel hesitated, then continued carefully. "There are two paths. First, we can consider implanting an LVAD. That's a left ventricular assist device. It's a mechanical pump placed inside the chest that helps the heart circulate blood. It's not a cure, but it can keep your mom alive while she waits." Sophie blinked, absorbing each word. "Like a helper for her heart?" "Exactly," Patel said. "The second path is a transplant, a donor heart. That's the long-term solution." Emily's shoulders sagged, her voice trembling. "And what stands between me and that?" Patel set her file aside, her eyes steady. "Insurance approval. I submitted your case last week. It was flagged for extended review." James's head snapped up. "Extended review? With numbers like these?" Patel nodded grimly. "It happens too often. They delay. They ask for more documentation. They wait. Sometimes until patients are too sick to qualify." Emily's hands gripped the edge of the table. "So I just wait? While my heart gives out?" Patel's expression softened, but her voice was firm. "I'll keep pushing. But yes, until they authorize, my hands are tied." The room fell into silence. James felt the old rage rising, the same helplessness he had once known in these halls. He stared at the blinds, his jaw set. Emily noticed. "You've been here before," she said quietly. James's eyes flicked to hers, haunted but unreadable. "Yes, a long time ago." He said no more. Sophie reached for her mother's hand, her green eyes wide. "They'll help you, Mom. They have to." Patel smiled gently at the girl, though her face betrayed the truth. Hope was fragile here, tangled in bureaucracy. The appointment ended with new prescriptions, instructions for monitoring symptoms, and a follow-up scheduled. Emily gathered her papers with slow hands. As they stepped back into the corridor, the buzz of monitors and overhead pages filled the air. James walked beside them, silent. He didn't speak until they reached the main lobby. "I can drive you home." Emily hesitated. "You don't have to." "I want to." His tone left no space for argument. The ride down Storrow Drive was quiet. Sophie hummed softly in the back seat, tracing shapes against the window fog. Emily sat rigidly in the passenger seat, staring at the river as it slipped past in streaks of gray and silver. Finally, she spoke. "You shouldn't involve yourself. These things, they grind people down, but that's just how the system works." James tightened his grip on the wheel. "That's how it's been allowed to work, not how it should." Emily turned, studying him. "And what are you going to do? Challenge an insurance company? Over me?" His voice was low, fierce. "Over anyone trapped in their waiting games." They pulled onto Charles Street. The gas lamps flickered to life as twilight fell. James stopped in front of Emily's building, but neither moved for a moment. Emily opened the door slowly, gathering Sophie's bag. "Thank you for the ride." James nodded, his voice quieter now. "Take care of yourself, Emily." She offered a faint smile, though her eyes betrayed her fear. Then she and Sophie disappeared into the brick-lined stairwell, the door closing softly behind them. James sat for a long time in the car, staring at the glow of the apartment window above. Inside was a mother clinging to survival, and a child fighting for joy. And he knew then, with absolute certainty, that he would not remain a bystander this time. The mahogany-paneled conference room in Cambridge was designed to inspire awe. Its walls were lined with oil portraits of financiers past, men whose legacies were carved in numbers rather than compassion. The long oval table gleamed under recessed lighting, every chair filled with a director whose suit cost more than most families made in a month. James Whittaker entered late, his shoulders squared, his jaw set. His presence alone pulled the chatter into silence. The CEO of Whittaker Financial had always carried authority, but today it was sharpened by something rarer: conviction. At the head of the table sat Richard Cole, chairman of the board, his silver hair slicked back, his cufflinks glinting like daggers in the light. Cole's smile was polished, but his eyes were predatory. "Whittaker," Cole drawled, leaning back in his leather chair, "we missed you at the market strategy session. I assume you've been distracted?" James slid into his seat, ignoring the bait. "I've been reviewing claims data from Commonwealth Assurance, the insurer in which we hold a controlling stake." That earned a ripple of interest around the table. One director cleared his throat. "Insurance? Why? That's not within your operational purview." James locked eyes with Cole. "A patient with end-stage heart failure had her case marked for extended review. She'll die without a transplant. The delay isn't medical, it's systemic." Cole's smirk deepened. "And why, pray tell, does this particular patient command your personal attention?" James's knuckles whitened against the table. "Because she's not alone. There are dozens, hundreds trapped in red tape. We profit from their suffering. That ends now." For a moment, silence blanketed the room. Then, like sharks circling blood, the directors shifted. One murmured about shareholder value, another about regulatory risk. Cole raised a manicured hand, still smiling. "You sound emotional," Cole said smoothly. "And that concerns me. The market does not reward emotion. You'd do well to remember that." James leaned forward, voice low and measured. "I remember my wife waiting for an approval that never came. I buried her because of delays we sanctioned. And now another woman, Emily Hayes, faces the same fate. I will not preside over that again." The room stiffened at the name. Someone whispered, "Hayes? Who is she?" Cole pounced. Ah, there it is. Personal entanglement. Rumors have already reached me, Whitaker, that our esteemed CEO has taken an interest in a single mother from Beacon Hill. Word is, you've been seen entering her apartment. The accusation sliced through the air. A few directors shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned in, hungry for scandal. James's chest burned, but he did not flinch. She's a human being. And if it takes scandal to expose how our policies kill, then let it be scandal. Cole's smile hardened into steel. Careful. Board confidence is not infinite. If you persist, you'll find yourself without a chair at this table. James straightened, his voice rising just enough to carry across the room. Then I'll stand. But I will not sit by while this company profits from death. The directors murmured, some exchanging uneasy glances. Cole tapped his fingers against the table, the rhythm deliberate, calculated. Your crusade is dangerous, James. You think yourself a savior, but saviors often end up crucified. James met his gaze, unblinking. Then I'll bear the nails. The meeting adjourned in uneasy silence, yet the storm had only begun. That evening, as James returned to his office overlooking the Charles, his phone buzzed with a notification. An anonymous email had landed in his inbox. Subject: Conflict of interest. Body: Your relationship with Emily Hayes compromises your position. The board will not tolerate favoritism. Resign before this destroys you. Attached was a grainy photograph of him outside Emily's apartment on Charles Street, Sophie's small hand visible clutching his sleeve. James's breath caught. He knew exactly who had orchestrated this leak. Cole wasn't just threatening his career. He was using Emily and Sophie as leverage. A knock on his office door pulled him back. Margaret Chen, the attorney he had discreetly contacted, stepped in. Her dark hair was tied back neatly, her briefcase brimming with files. "You were right," she said without preamble. "Commonwealth's delay patterns are systemic. I've pulled case law under ERISA and Massachusetts statutes. If we move quickly, we can file for emergency relief." James gestured for her to sit, his voice tight. "Do it. File whatever you need." Chen studied him carefully. "This isn't just about one woman, is it? This is about your wife, about redemption." James didn't answer. His gaze drifted to the city lights shimmering across the Charles River. In their reflection, he saw not just his grief, but the possibility of change. "Margaret," he said finally, "make them answer for every life they've delayed." She nodded once, determination in her eyes. "Then we'll fight. But you need to be ready. Cole will hit back harder than you can imagine." James exhaled slowly, the weight of war settling over him. Let him. I'm done hiding in shadows. As the night deepened, James stood at his window, watching the city pulse beneath him. Somewhere across the river, Emily was tucking Sophie into bed, unaware of the battle already raging on her behalf. Cole had made his move. Now it was James's turn. The offices of Greater Boston Legal Services sat tucked between brick storefronts near Downtown Crossing. Unlike the glass towers of Cambridge, there were no marble floors, no oil portraits of men in tailored suits, only cracked linoleum, humming fluorescent lights, and a waiting room lined with folding chairs. But for Emily Hayes, this modest office felt like her last line of defense. She sat with Sophie beside her, clutching the folder marked MGH, cardiology like a shield. Her chest rose shallowly, each breath reminding her of the weight she carried. Sophie leaned her head on her arm, humming softly, unaware of the storm her mother faced. The door opened and Margaret Chen appeared, a woman in her 40s, her black blazer worn at the edges, her eyes sharp as glass. She extended a hand to Emily, her grip firm but reassuring. "Ms. Hayes, I'm Margaret. Let's talk in my office." Inside, stacks of case files towered like miniature skyscrapers. On the wall hung a faded poster quoting Justice Brandeis. Sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants. Emily sat carefully, pressing a hand to her chest. "I've tried everything," she whispered. "Phone calls, appeals, letters. They just say my case is under review." Chen opened the folder, scanning lab results and discharge notes. Her brow furrowed. "Your ejection fraction is 20%. You need advanced therapy now." Emily's voice cracked. "They're going to let me die, aren't they?" Chen shook her head firmly. "Not if I can help it. Under ERISA and Massachusetts law, insurers have a duty to process critical claims without unreasonable delay. We'll file an emergency injunction." At that moment, the door creaked, and James Whitaker stepped in. His presence seemed almost out of place in this modest office, his tailored coat contrasting with peeling paint. Emily stiffened. "What are you doing here?" she asked. James's voice was quiet, deliberate. "I asked Margaret to take your case, and I'll cover every cost." Emily's eyes widened. "You can't. I don't want your charity." James sat across from her, his gaze unwavering. "This isn't charity. It's justice. They stalled my wife's treatment and I buried her. I won't watch them do the same to you." Sophie looked between them, her small hand finding James's sleeve. "Please, Mom," she whispered. "He's on our side." Emily closed her eyes, torn between pride and desperation. Finally, she nodded once. Chen wasted no time. "We'll request an emergency hearing at Suffolk Superior Court. If the judge agrees, the insurer will be ordered to authorize your procedure immediately." 2 days later, the courthouse loomed over Pemberton Square, its granite columns shadowing the people who entered. Emily's steps faltered on the stone stairs, but James offered his arm. For once, she did not push it away. Inside the courtroom, the air smelled of old wood and ink. A clerk called the case, Hayes v. Commonwealth Assurance. Margaret Chen rose, her voice steady as she addressed Judge Keller, a stern woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun. "Your Honor, my client is a 32-year-old single mother with end-stage heart failure. Every day of delay reduces her survival odds. Commonwealth Assurance has unlawfully stalled her claim, violating both ERISA and Massachusetts precedent. We request immediate relief." The insurer's attorney, a tall man with a smirk that matched his cufflinks, rose in turn. "Your Honor, with respect, this is a standard review process. The plaintiff exaggerates the urgency. The company must protect against fraud and ensure protocols are met." Chen's rebuttal was swift. "Fraud? This woman is fighting to breathe. Her doctors at MGH have documented that delay equals death. That is not exaggeration, it is fact." Judge Keller studied the file, her brow creased. "And you can confirm, Ms. Chen, that this patient's cardiologist has declared her situation emergent?" Chen placed Dr. Patel's affidavit on the bench. "Yes, Your Honor. It is attached here." The insurer's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Judge Keller tapped her pen once, then twice. Finally, she spoke. "This court cannot allow bureaucracy to play executioner. I grant the injunction. Commonwealth Assurance is ordered to authorize treatment within 48 hours." Emily exhaled sharply, her hand flying to her lips. Tears welled in her eyes as Sophie squeezed her arm. James closed his eyes, his throat tight. For once, the gavel did not sound like judgment, but like salvation. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Local news reporters already briefed by anonymous sources. One microphone was thrust into James's face. "Mr. Whitaker, is it true you're funding this lawsuit for a woman you're personally involved with?" James froze, blindsided. He caught sight of Cole standing at the edge of the crowd, his smile cold, his phone glinting like a dagger. The leak had been his. Emily stiffened beside him, humiliated by the insinuation. But James stepped forward, voice clear and unflinching. "This case isn't about me," he said. "It's about a system that lets people die while profits climb. If defending a mother's right to live is scandal, then I'll wear that scandal proudly." The cameras clicked, reporters shouted follow-ups, but James ignored them. He guided Emily and Sophie through the crowd, shielding them as best he could. That night, in her small apartment on Charles Street, Emily sat by the window, staring at the glow of the city. She still felt the gavel's echo in her chest, but also the weight of unwanted attention. James stood at the doorway, uncertain. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Cole won't stop here. He'll try to discredit you. To discredit us." Emily turned, her eyes tired but fierce. "Let him. I don't care about headlines. I care about staying alive for Sophie." Sophie, curled up with her sketchbook, looked up at both of them. "Then we fight together." The words, spoken by a child, carried more truth than anything James had heard in a boardroom. For the first time since Anna's death, he felt a strange, fragile hope. The battle had only begun, but he no longer faced it alone. The Charles River at night was a mirror of shadows. Along the esplanade, the lamps glowed in quiet halos, their light trembling on the rippling water. The wind carried the scent of damp leaves and the faint murmur of traffic from Storrow Drive. James walked slowly, his hands tucked deep in his coat pockets. Beside him, Emily moved with deliberate steps, her wool scarf tugged high at her throat. Her breath came unevenly, though she disguised it with small pauses, as if admiring the river. Tonight was the first evening in weeks that Sophie had stayed with a neighbor, giving them space neither had expected, or entirely wanted. Emily leaned against the railing, her pale face turned toward the dark water. "You know, I used to walk here in college," she said softly. "Back then I thought life was going to be so simple. A classroom of children, a little apartment, maybe a few summers traveling. I thought happiness would just happen." She gave a small, brittle laugh. Instead, it became hospitals and bills, and telling a 6-year-old why her mother couldn't climb stairs without resting. James stood beside her, silent for a long moment. Then his voice broke the stillness. "You've carried more than anyone should." She turned, her eyes searching. "And you? You carry something too. I can see it. You wear grief like a coat you can't take off." His throat tightened. He had never intended to tell her, not here, not like this. But her words stripped him bare. He gripped the cold railing, the metal biting into his palm. "Anna," he whispered, the name catching like glass in his throat. "And Clara, my wife and daughter." Emily's breath stilled. "1 year ago," James continued, his voice low, jagged. "We were driving home from dinner. A drunk driver ran a red light. Their car. It crushed ours. I sat in this very hospital, in corridors that felt endless, waiting for doctors to tell me they would be all right. But they weren't. The insurance delays, the approvals, they said treatments were still pending review. By the time they cleared it, it was too late. I buried them both." He pressed his forehead briefly against the railing, fighting the tremor in his chest. "Since then, I've walked through life like a ghost. I thought if I built more towers, made more money, I could outrun the silence. But the silence always wins." Emily's hand, fragile yet steady, touched his arm. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "No one should carry that." He turned to her, his eyes raw. "When I saw you at MGH, it was like stepping back into that nightmare. But this time, I couldn't walk away. I won't walk away. Her lips quivered. She looked back at the water. That terrifies me. Why? Because of Sophie. Her voice broke. She's already lost one parent. If she lets herself believe in you, and then if I... She swallowed hard, unable to finish. If I don't make it, she'll lose again, and I can't do that to her. James stepped closer, his voice fierce and low. Then I'll make sure she never loses again. Whether you push me away or not, I'll be here. For her. For you. The lamplight flickered across Emily's face, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. For one fragile moment, something unspoken bloomed between them, two lives fractured, leaning toward each other. Then Emily stiffened. A sharp gasp tore from her chest. Her hand flew to her sternum, her knees buckling. She staggered against the railing, her breath ragged. "Emily!" James caught her as her body sagged, her pulse fluttering wildly beneath his fingers. "I can't," she gasped, her voice fading. Panic surged through him. He shouted down the path, his voice breaking the still night. "Help! Call 911!" Somewhere in the distance, a jogger fumbled for a phone, the air filled with the rising wail of sirens slicing through the dark like knives. James knelt with Emily cradled against him, his overcoat spread beneath her. Her skin was ashen, her lips pale. He pressed his palm against her chest, feeling the weak, erratic thrum of a heart losing its fight. "Stay with me," he whispered, his voice raw. "Don't you dare leave her. Don't you dare leave Sophie." Her eyelids fluttered, her gaze finding his through a haze of pain. "Promise. Promise me." Tears blurred his vision. "I promise. I'll take care of her. I swear it." The sirens drew closer, a piercing cry that shook the river air. Red and blue lights streaked across the lampposts, bouncing against the water. Paramedics rushed forward, their gear rattling. "Patient unresponsive, possible cardiogenic shock." Hands lifted Emily onto a stretcher, straps tightening around her fragile frame. James tried to let go, but her fingers clung faintly to his sleeve until the last moment. "Stay clear," a medic barked. They rolled her swiftly toward the ambulance, wheels clattering against the path. James followed, his breath ragged, his shoes scraping against the pavement. The cold metal of the ambulance step bit beneath his palms as he climbed in after her. Inside, the air reeked of antiseptic and adrenaline. Machines beeped, wires tangled across her chest. The paramedic's voice cut sharp. "Prepare for LVAD! Stat!" James sat hunched in the cramped corner, gripping the railing as the vehicle jolted forward. Emily lay pale and still, her body shaking with each compression. The sirens howled above them, splitting the night. He bowed his head, whispering against the chaos, "Don't take her. Not her too." As the ambulance roared toward MGH, James felt the cold steel beneath his hand and the thrum of wheels against the road. No light guided them, only the sound of the siren, the clatter of metal, the fight of machines against death. And in that storm of noise, one fragile promise held him upright, that Sophie would never be alone. The corridors of Massachusetts General were alive with a frantic rhythm, rushing gurneys, clipped orders, the wail of alarms echoing through sterile walls. James Whitaker sat outside the operating suite, his head in his hands, while Sophie pressed against his side, her small body trembling with fear. Inside, Emily lay under blinding lights. Surgeons worked swiftly, their movements rehearsed but urgent. Her failing heart no longer carried her. It was time to give her another pulse. Left ventricular assist device. Prep cannulas. Flow target 4.6 liters per minute, Dr. Patel commanded, her voice calm but edged with tension. Machines whirred. Gloves snapped. The room became a symphony of controlled chaos. For James, every beep of the monitor was a hammer against his chest. Sophie's whisper broke through. "She's going to die, isn't she?" James pulled her onto his lap, holding her tightly. "No," he said, though his voice cracked. "They're giving her something to help. A machine to hum for her until her own heart can return." The little girl blinked, trying to understand. "So, it will sing for her?" "Yes," James whispered, pressing his forehead against hers. "It will sing until she's strong enough to sing again." Hours dragged by. Nurses hurried past, their shoes squeaking against linoleum. James barely noticed the passing of time. He only saw the sketchbook Sophie clutched in her lap, the pages filled with drawings of 3 figures holding hands, of red hearts colored boldly in crayon. Finally, the doors swung open. Dr. Patel emerged, her surgical mask lowered, exhaustion etched across her face. Yet her eyes carried something fragile but undeniable. Hope. "She's stable," Patel said. "The LVAD is working. It's not a cure, but it will sustain her until we can get her on the transplant list." James exhaled sharply, relief flooding through him so forcefully he almost swayed. Sophie jumped down, tugging at Patel's sleeve. "Can I see her?" "Just for a moment," Patel said gently. "She'll be very tired." The recovery room hummed softly. Emily lay motionless, wires trailing across her chest, the LVAD's steady thrum filling the silence. Her skin was pale, her lips faintly parted, but her chest rose with a rhythm steadier than before. Sophie climbed onto the chair beside the bed, her eyes wide. "Mom?" she whispered. There was no response, only the low hum of the device. Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. She turned to James, her voice breaking. "Everyone leaves. First Dad, then Grandpa. What if she leaves too?" James knelt beside her, his hand covering hers. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his own past pressing against him, the graves he had already stood beside. But this time, he would not let silence answer. "I'll be here," he said, his voice low, steady, almost a vow. He leaned close, so only Sophie could hear. "When she opens her eyes, I'll be right here. And when you're afraid, I'll still be here. I'm not leaving you, Sophie, not ever." Her tears fell, but her grip tightened around his fingers. "Promise?" "Promise," he whispered. For the first time, a faint smile flickered on her face. She laid her head against his shoulder, and together they listened to the steady hum of the LVAD, as if it were the sound of hope itself. But outside these walls, the world was less forgiving. The next morning, newspapers splashed his name across headlines. CEO in hospital scandal. Whitaker tied to patient receiving emergency device. The coverage was ruthless. Anchors debated conflict of interest. Board members whispered of impropriety. To them, Emily Hayes was not a mother or a patient fighting to breathe. She was a liability, a scandal. Richard Cole fed the fire, releasing carefully timed leaks. A photo of James walking into Emily's apartment. An anonymous email hinting at favoritism. But James barely looked at the papers. He sat at Emily's bedside, his hand resting over hers, feeling the faint warmth of life returning through the device. Sophie sat cross-legged on the chair, drawing another picture, this time of a machine next to a red heart, both connected by bold, crayon-colored lines. Emily stirred faintly, her eyelids fluttering. She turned her head, her lips parting in a weak whisper. "James?" He leaned close. "I'm here." Her hand moved slowly, trembling, but found his. "The machine. It's helping," he said gently. "It's carrying you until your heart can carry you again." Tears slipped down her cheeks. her strength too fragile for words. She closed her eyes once more, but her hand stayed in his, refusing to let go. That evening, Margaret Chen arrived with a file tucked under her arm. Her expression was tight with urgency. "We've secured a court order. Commonwealth Assurance must review her case within 48 hours or face contempt." James looked up from the bedside, his voice sharp. "Will that be enough?" "It will force their hand," Chen replied. "But Cole is moving against you. He's spinning this as personal favoritism. The board is restless." James's jaw tightened. "Let them talk. If compassion is scandal, then I'll wear it." Sophie, listening from her chair, looked up. "Does that mean they'll let Mom get a new heart?" Chen softened, kneeling to meet her eyes. "It means we've opened the door, Sophie. Now we fight to keep it open." Night fell. Machines hummed steadily. James sat by the bed, his coat draped across the back of the chair, his hand never leaving Emily's. Sophie had fallen asleep on the sofa, her sketchbook open beside her, crayon hearts scattered across the page. James watched the rise and fall of Emily's chest, each movement powered by the device. It wasn't the natural rhythm of a living heart, but it was rhythm nonetheless, a borrowed song keeping her alive. And in that hum, he heard something more than machinery. He heard promise. He heard survival. He heard the fragile beginnings of a family not yet whole, but refusing to surrender. The Prudential Tower rose over Boston like a cathedral of commerce, its glass and steel catching the morning sun. Inside its 52nd floor boardroom, the city's elite gathered. Directors in tailored suits, attorneys with thick binders, journalists pressing against the glass wall outside. The air vibrated with anticipation. Something seismic was about to happen. James Whittaker stood at the center of the storm. His face was drawn, but his eyes burned with clarity. On the table before him lay a leather folder. Within it, documents that could shatter reputations, topple careers, and redeem lives. Richard Cole sat at the head of the polished table, composed as ever, his silver hair immaculate, his cufflinks gleaming. He looked at James with the smug calm of a man who believed the game already won. "Mr. Whittaker," Cole said, his voice smooth as glass, "you've dragged this company through scandal. You've compromised shareholder confidence. Today is your chance to resign with dignity." James met his gaze, unflinching. "I won't resign. Not because of lies, and not while people are dying under policies we control." A murmur rippled across the board. Cameras from the press beyond the glass blinked red, recording every word. James opened the folder. "Here are internal communications from Commonwealth Assurance, the insurer we hold controlling interest in. Memos explicitly state that claims were to be delayed, not for medical necessity, but for financial gain. Patients marked as non-profitable were systematically stalled." Gasps cut through the room. He lifted a page, reading aloud. "Directive. Cases requiring advanced devices or transplants should undergo extended review to preserve quarterly profit margins. Anticipate attrition from mortality." The words hung in the air like poison. Cole leaned back, his smile strained but intact. "Corporate policy is complex. These are selective interpretations." James's voice sharpened. "Interpretations? Tell that to the families who buried loved ones while waiting for approvals. Tell that to Emily Hayes, whose heart is now kept alive by a machine because of these so-called interpretations." From the side of the room, Margaret Chen stepped forward, her presence precise and unwavering. She placed a thick file before the directors. "These aren't interpretations. This is evidence. Class action suits have already been filed on behalf of multiple patients. The courts will see what you've done." Cole's composure cracked for the first time. "You're playing with fire, Whittaker." James stepped closer, his voice resonant. No, Richard, you are. You built an empire on the backs of people gasping for air. You sold death as profit, and today it ends. He motioned to the large screen at the end of the room. A video began to play. Testimonies of patients and families recorded in hushed tones, their grief laid bare. A young mother clutching a photograph. An elderly man who had mortgaged his home while waiting for approval that never came. Their voices filled the sterile room with humanity, cutting deeper than any ledger ever could. Cole slammed his hand on the table. This is a spectacle, nothing more. Judge-like calm swept over Dr. Patel as she entered the room. She had come directly from MGH, white coat still draped over her shoulders. In her hand was a letter, sealed with the hospital's insignia. I submitted an emergency statement to the court, Patel said clearly. Delays in Emily Hayes' case directly endangered her life. This isn't conjecture, it's medical fact. And she is not the only one. Cole's face drained of color. The board erupted in whispers, directors shifting uneasily in their seats. The weight of truth pressed heavily against the polished walls of the Prudential Tower. Finally, one of the elder directors spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Mr. Cole, your actions have endangered lives and placed this company at catastrophic legal risk. Effective immediately, you are removed as chairman. Cole shot to his feet. You can't do this! But the vote was swift, decisive. The gavel of corporate justice fell, not with sound, but with silence. Directors turning their backs on the man who had ruled them with fear. Cole's gaze darted to James, hatred burning. This isn't over. James met his stare with steady resolve. Yes. It is. Security escorted Cole from the room, his protests echoing faintly down the hall. The boardroom shifted, the tension breaking into something tentative but new. Margaret Chen stepped forward once more. We propose the creation of the Compassion Fast Track Fund, a permanent foundation to expedite approvals for critical patients, funded not by charity, but by reallocating profits that once came from delay. For the first time in years, the board applauded, not in profit, but in principle. James exhaled, his shoulders releasing a weight that had haunted him since Anna's death. Across the glass wall, the press recorded every moment, their pens racing, their cameras flashing. Outside, the city carried on, but inside the Prudential Tower, a new kind of legacy was written. That evening, James returned to Massachusetts General. Emily was awake now, her skin pale but her eyes alert, the LVAD humming steadily beside her bed. Sophie sat on the blanket, drawing another picture, this time of the Prudential Tower with 3 stick figures standing tall beside it. You look tired, Emily whispered, her voice fragile. James smiled faintly. I've been busy. Sophie held up her drawing, her grin wide. Is that where you made the bad man go away? James's chest tightened. He glanced at Emily, then back at Sophie. Yes, he said softly. That's exactly where. Emily reached for his hand, her touch light but certain. Thank you, she murmured. For the first time since the accident that shattered his world, James felt as though he had finally begun to keep a promise, not only to his past, but to his future. Snow fell lightly over Boston that December night, flakes swirling beneath the glow of hospital floodlights. Inside Massachusetts General, hope finally pierced through weeks of waiting. Dr. Anika Patel stepped into Emily's room, her lab coat damp at the edges from melted snow. She held a folder close to her chest, her expression weary but bright. Emily, she said, her voice carrying a calm authority softened by relief. We've received confirmation. You've been approved. You are officially on the UNOS transplant list. The words seemed to hang in the air like a fragile bell. Emily's hand flew to her lips. Tears filled her eyes, and her chest trembled with the rhythm of the LVAD. Sophie was the first to react. She squealed, climbing onto the bed and wrapping her arms around her mother's neck. "Mom, that means you're going to get better, right?" Emily kissed the top of her daughter's head, her voice breaking. "It means there's a chance, sweetheart. A real chance." James stood near the window, his silhouette framed by the falling snow outside. For the first time in weeks, his shoulders loosened, his breath flowing freely. He turned, his gaze meeting Emily's. The unspoken weight between them, the battles in court, the headlines, the late-night vigils, seemed to ease. Emily whispered, "Thank you. Without you, I wouldn't even be here." James shook his head. "You fought every day to stay alive. This was always you, Emily." Later that evening, after Dr. Patel left, the room quieted. Machines hummed steadily, their blinking lights casting faint reflections on the window. Sophie climbed into the chair beside James, her sketchbook balanced on her knees. She looked at him with solemn eyes far older than 6 years should hold. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," James said, leaning closer. Her voice trembled. "If something happens to Mom, will you be my dad?" The question struck him like a blow. His breath caught, memories colliding, the small hand of Clara clutching his once, now lost forever, the grave silence that followed. And here, another child, fragile and brave, asking not for toys or promises of forever, but for belonging. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Sophie's forehead. His voice was low, steady, as if carving a vow into stone. "Sophie, you will never be without a parent again. Do you hear me? No matter what happens, I will be here." Her lips curved into a trembling smile. She pressed her forehead to his. "Then you're already my dad?" Emily's tears spilled freely. She reached for James's hand, her touch weak but filled with gratitude. "I don't know what miracle brought you to us, but thank you. For her." The next day, Margaret Chen returned with documents. She set them gently on the bedside table. "This is emergency guardianship paperwork. It ensures James can make decisions for Sophie if you're incapacitated. We can file it tonight." Emily nodded, though her lips trembled. "Do it. I need to know she'll never be alone." James hesitated only briefly. Then he took the pen. His signature swept across the page, black ink binding not just legal authority, but a promise. When he finished, Sophie crawled onto his lap, inspecting the paper with curious eyes. "So this means you're my dad now?" James smiled softly. "In all the ways that matter, yes." Her small arms tightened around his neck. "Good. I've been waiting." That night, the hospital felt unusually still. Snow muffled the city, softening sirens and footsteps into whispers. James sat by Emily's bed, Sophie asleep in the armchair, her sketchbook open to another drawing. 3 figures under a snowy sky, their hands linked. James watched the rise and fall of Emily's chest, the LVAD humming. He thought of promises, broken ones from his past, new ones now binding his present. His grief had once told him he was incapable of love again. Yet here he was, tethered to 2 lives as if fate had demanded it. Emily stirred, her eyes half opening. "Why are you still here?" she whispered, her voice weak but teasing. He leaned forward. "Because this is where I belong." She smiled faintly, drifting back into sleep, her hand still holding his. It was near midnight when the shrill ring of the hospital phone shattered the quiet. A nurse hurried in, her eyes wide, her breath visible in the cold draft from the hall. "We have a donor heart," she said quickly. "It's a match." The words struck like lightning. James froze, then turned toward Emily. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to tears as she understood. Sophie stirred awake, blinking against the light. "What's happening?" she murmured. James knelt beside her, voice trembling but steady. "They found a new heart for your mom," Sophie gasped, her small hands clapping to her mouth. "Really?" Emily's tears streamed freely, her lips forming silent prayers. James gathered them both into his arms, the three of them clinging together as the nurse hurried to prepare. Dr. Patel entered moments later, calm but urgent. "We need to move now. The surgical team is ready." Emily reached for Sophie, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I love you, sweetheart. Always." Sophie clung to her fiercely. "You'll come back, Mom. You have to." James placed his hand over both of theirs. "She will. We'll face this together." The gurney arrived. Nurses lifted Emily gently, the wires trailing behind. She never let go of Sophie's hand until the last possible second. Then the doors swung open, and she was wheeled into the corridor of light and shadow. James stood with Sophie in the hallway, his heart pounding in sync with the rush of wheels and the echo of approaching destiny. And as the elevator doors closed around Emily, he whispered to the silence, a promise echoing louder than fear. "You are not alone. Not anymore." The operating suite moved with a steady, practiced tempo, voices low, instruments precise. Outside, in a quiet waiting alcove, James held Sophie's hand as if the simple act could anchor the world in place. She leaned against him with her sketchbook open, a single page waiting, blank, ready for whatever came next. Hours stretched, not with spectacle, but with small sounds. The dry click of a wall clock, a distant cart rolling past, the soft exhale of a ventilation vent. When at last the door eased open, Dr. Anika Patel stepped out, removing her cap. Fatigue pulled at her features, but her eyes carried the calm of a promise kept. "The transplant went well," she said. "The new heart is strong. We'll watch closely for rejection. But for now, she's with us." Sophie made a sound like a laugh entering a cry and threw her arms around James's neck. He closed his eyes, letting gratitude gather without words. There would be more nights at the hospital, more numbers to study, more careful walks, and yet the corridor's cold had lifted. The future was no longer a wall. It was a hallway with a light at the end, steady and patient. Recovery came in increments, as honest healing often does. In the days that followed, Emily learned the new rhythm within her chest. Cautious steps at first, a slow chair-to-door, then door-to-window, then a measured circuit of the ward. Nurses adjusted medications. Dr. Patel explained signs to watch: fever, swelling, uninvited tiredness. Through it all, Sophie became a small, cheerful sentinel, counting steps like beads and placing stickers on a paper chart she taped to the bedside table. James arrived each morning with a modest ritual: black coffee for him, chamomile tea for Emily, a muffin to split. Some mornings they ate. Some mornings the drinks cooled, forgotten, while they watched the river shimmy past the hospital windows and let the quiet say what words could not. On one such morning, Emily stood beside the glass in a soft sweater, hands resting on the sill. Beacon Hill rose beyond the river, brick and slate and chimney pots, the city honest in late winter light. "I didn't think I would see it again," she whispered. "You will," James said, "and not through a window." She turned, still thin, still pale, but with color at the edges of her face, as if dawn had been carefully brushed there. "You kept your word." We kept it, he answered. You, me, and a 6-year-old general who wouldn't let the line break. From the chair, Sophie looked up, fingering the red ribbon at her hair. 7, she corrected, grinning. I'm 7 now. Emily's laughter came small and true, and the room held it the way a palm holds water, gently, careful not to spill. The day Emily was discharged, Boston's sky was clean and high. The nurses gathered with kind instructions. Dr. Patel went over the checklist again. Meds, numbers, what-ifs. She paused before leaving. There's a family somewhere grieving today, Patel said softly. A family who said yes. Carry them with care. Emily nodded, pressing her hand to her chest. Every beat, she said. They stepped out into the ordinary light of the street. Ordinary felt holy. At home on Charles Street, the stairwell took time, but not fear. Emily paused at each landing, then moved on, the new rhythm firm beneath her palm on the rail. Inside, the little apartment welcomed them without ceremony. Sophie had hidden a paper banner behind the sofa and now unfurled it with flourish. Welcome home, in careful block letters, a heart dotting the E. They ate soup that tasted like a return. That night, after Sophie fell asleep with a crayon tucked in her fist, Emily and James sat by the window, the city breathing quietly around them. Do you ever think about what to do with a second life? She asked. All the time, he said. And I think the first answer is, live it. The second? She asked. He looked at her. Make it matter. 2 weeks later, they found the language to begin. In a modest room donated by a friend near Copley Square, reporters set their recorders beside paper cups and set down their hard questions for an hour. The Whitaker Hayes Foundation announced itself without fanfare. Its first program, the Compassion Fast Track, would fund and accelerate urgent approvals for patients wavering on the edge between waiting and too late. It would also support travel and lodging for families suddenly spun into the machinery of transplant lists, hospital corridors, and baffling forms. We aren't overturning a system in a day, James told the small crowd. We're taking the delay out of decisions that should never have been delayed. Margaret Chen stepped up to speak of early legal victories, of a consortium of hospitals agreeing to a shared rapid review pilot. Dr. Patel, white coat traded for a navy blazer, spoke not of miracle cures, but of margins, how hours and days can be the difference between a signature on a form and a seat at a funeral. Emily stood last, hands steady on the podium. She spoke simply, like a teacher at the front of a class. A stranger's family gave me a second chance. I can't waste it. If you want to help, don't look at us. Look for the nearest person waiting in a hallway and ask if they have eaten. Then ask what else they need. It was not a glamorous prescription. It was better. Afterward, when the pictures were taken and the lights packed up, the three of them walked slowly toward the river, coats buttoned, pace unhurried. On the way, Sophie tugged James's sleeve. Did we change the world? She asked. Maybe a corner of it, he said. Corners are where rooms stop feeling empty. They reached the esplanade near dusk. The river moved with unhurried purpose. The wind smelled of thawing earth. Sophie held a small paper cone against her chest. Inside, 3 flowers, 1 white, 1 red, 1 yellow, waited like promises. Are you ready? Emily asked. Sophie nodded solemnly. I practiced the words. They stood at the rail. James untwisted the paper, and Sophie lifted the first stem. White. For the past, she said, placing it gently on the slow water. It turned and caught the current. Emily took the red bloom. For today. Her voice did not shake. James held the yellow last. He looked at them both, and a quiet entered him that he had not felt in years. "For tomorrow," he said. He set it free. The 3 flowers drifted together, not racing, simply keeping company as the river carried them forward. They watched until the colors folded into distance. Sophie slipped her small hand into Emily's left and James's right. "We matched," she said, "like the heart did." They smiled, not because the line was clever, but because it was true. Spring came up Beacon Hill 1 brick at a time. Emily learned her city again. The shopkeeper who saved the first baguette for Sophie's after-school snack, the mail carrier who always asked about the new engine, the neighbor who knocked with a casserole and left without asking to stay. James learned different routes to the hospital for follow-up visits and the names of medicines with syllables like long stairs. He kept the Foundation's first grants small and fast. He volunteered to read paperwork out loud to families who found the sentences too tired to decipher. On Sundays, they walked the red brick labyrinth of the neighborhood at the pace of conversation. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. Both ways felt like prayer. One afternoon, standing at the window of the apartment where this new life began, Emily said, "I used to measure my days by what I couldn't do. Now I count what I can." She turned, placing James's hand over her heart. "Listen." He did. It was firm and ordinary. He had never loved the ordinary so much. Sophie, cross-legged on the rug, looked up from the drawing she was finishing. "I made us a house," she announced, "but with a bigger table, for when more people come." "More people?" James asked. "The ones we help," she said, as if it were obvious. "Where else will they eat?" He laughed then, the kind that shakes worry loose. "Of course." That night, after dishes and a chapter of a book about a girl and her very stubborn goat, the 3 of them stood again at the window. Boston moved outside, headlights, voices, a siren in the far distance that never turned down their street. James thought of a bench in Boston Common and a question that had broken a long silence. "I don't need a gift. I just want my mom to smile. Could you come?" He answered it every day now without speaking. Emily leaned her head to his shoulder. Sophie wedged herself between them with the expertise of a child who has learned where she belongs. The room seemed warmer than the radiator explained. "Home," Sophie declared. "Yes," Emily said. James let the word settle, then added another he could not have imagined saying a year earlier. "Ours." The city kept breathing. The river kept moving. Somewhere, someone signed a donor card. Somewhere else, a nurse pressed a warm cup into cold hands. The Foundation's inbox pinged with a request, and then an answer. Small things, necessary things, the kind that make a life. Inside the little apartment on Charles Street, 3 people stood quietly and listened to a heart that had learned a new song, and to the softer, larger chorus that rose when people choose one another. A heartbeat for a person. A heartbeat for a city. A new heartbeat for Boston. Thank you for staying with us until the very last chapter of this journey. If this story of hope, healing, and unexpected family touched your heart, please consider subscribing, so you'll never miss the next story that reminds us love can change everything.